Up close to the camera.
Mm-hmm. You
the
can
picture
look that
and
way.
Stuff.
You know, can also.
Elvis Presley.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh,
can you tell me about the
I
picture?
was taken in a bar in New York City at the day I got discharged.
All right.
Me and another guy, we hit the bars
Good.
before I went home.
Oh, wonderful.
Do you remember the date?
Let's see. We've got it.
Let's see. Well, it's October 19th, 1945. And here we are at the bar. Cuban labor was 50 cents.
Oh.
Today it'd be probably $10.
Yeah.
That's great.
That's a buddy of mine.
Oh, that is great.
We got discharged together.
What was his name? What's your buddy's name?
Bob. I forgot his last name.
He'll come to you as we go through.
Conklin. Bob.
Bob.
Great.
Okay.
My, I don't know, I just brought it anyhow. Order to report for induction.
You let her.
That's an oldie, but you couldn't take that.
But she can photograph it.
This is my discharge. And there's a couple of little pictures. And all kinds of good stuff there. Well, there's my award, the Silver Star.
Mm-hmm. All right.
But you can't hardly read it. It's starting to fade. But we could read that off and get it into the...
Why don't you go? Would you like to go ahead and read it off? Would you like to read it off?
Should I read it off?
Sure.
Sure.
I don't want to brag.
No, go ahead.
Okay, site headquarters, 4th Armored Division, U.S. Army. Citation: the Silver Star Medal is awarded to Corporal Alexander Bohen, 3297-0907, Armored, 35th Tank Battalion, U.S. Army, for gallantry in action against an armed enemy of the United States, 24th of March, 1945, in Furfeld, Germany. Corporal Bohen came upon a German Mark V tank coming from a side street accompanied by 20 enemy infantry. While his Peep driver, Peep is in the Armored Division, a Jeep is a Peep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The Jeep is the larger one.
Yeah.
Okay, while his Peep driver drove the enemy infantry away, Corporal Bohen climbed onto the tank and threw an incendiary grenade into the engine compartment, setting it on fire and causing the crew to abandon it. Together with his Peep driver, he captured the tank crew and enemy infantry, thus saving the remainder of the column from ambush. Corporal Bowen's courage and leadership reflect great credit upon himself and the armed forces of the United States. Hot dog.
Yeah.
You think I could climb on that tank anymore? I think I need a ladder. But I was only 18 years old. It's a little different.
Yeah. What else do you have there?
Well, just stuff like this. Certificate of merit. You don't care about the discharge and all that stuff, do you?
Well, it's whatever. How about your pictures
My
there?
father collected some junk.
Yeah.
Like that. Well, here's a picture of me
Here.
with garrison cap on.
So this is when you trained at Fort Knox, Kentucky. Who put this together?
Ah, my father did.
Your father did?
It's old.
That's great. Okay. Now, what else do you have?
And this is the different medals that I won.
Oh, have it upside down. Excuse me.
Let's see if I can tell you.
Yeah, why don't we go from the
Okay,
top?
that's the presidential citation. That's the Silver Star. This is what you just wear on your uniform, but there's a medal that goes with it. That's a good conduct medal, and I don't know, I didn't deserve that. This was the Defense of the U.S. That's the European Theater Operation ribbon with 5 battle stars. But instead of giving, they used to give just 5. Now they made it 1 silver for 5 campaigns.
Oh, good.
I think that's the defeat of Germany, occupation of Germany. French gave me the Croix de Guerre, and this is. I was an expert with the rifle. I was a sergeant. That means armored. And that's my division, 4th Armored. And now I belong to the American Legion. Isn't that nice?
That's very nice.
Yeah.
That's great.
I had that made up.
That's great.
Okay. That's enough of that stuff.
Okay. All right. Well, shall we begin? Is it still on?
Yep.
Oh, okay. This is Friday, February 7th, 2003. Today's interview is with World War II veteran Alexander Joseph Bohen. It's taking place here at the Chemung County Historical Society in Elmira, New York. Mr. Bohen is 77 years old, having been born on April 6, 1925. He served in World War II from June 17, 1943,
Right.
to October 19, 1945.
Right.
He currently resides at 17 Skylark Drive, Horseheads, New York.
Right.
My name is Marlene Zeca, and I volunteered to interview Mr. Bohen as part of the Veterans History Project. And our camera operator today is Heather Wade. Al?
And I'm going to leave you two alone.
Okay.
Yeah, if you need
Yep.
anything, okay?
All right. That's great.
Oh.
Right?
So are we being
What?
recorded?
We are being recorded.
Oh,
but
the
don't-
camera's on?
Yeah, the camera's
That
on.
don't matter.
No,
Are you on the
that's-
camera? You should be in there too.
No, I might, maybe at the end we'll take a group shot.
Just stick your head in there.
Yeah, we'll do a group shot at the end.
Okay.
What, we talked before, and I had suggested earlier if following like a chronological approach
Okay.
through how you began in your military service,
Okay.
and whatever you can remember as it goes through to the end.
Okay.
Now, I know that you were in Brooklyn, is that correct? When
Yeah,
you
born in Brooklyn.
Okay.
Right. And I'd say we'll just start when I was in high school, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I was born in Brooklyn. And when I turned 18 in April 6th, I had to register for the draft. That was 1943. I wanted to enlist, but my mother insisted I finish high school. Because a lot of kids were enlisting. And then I was put in class 1A, and then I think it was in June 17th they called me down for a physical. I passed the physical, and I couldn't pass it now. I passed the physical,
Yeah.
and at that time, each service was desperate for men, and they had daily quotas. They had an Army guy, a Navy guy, and a Marine guy, and as you were okay, you were accepted, you passed your physical. Each had a daily quota. So the Marine guy didn't have his quota, he wanted me, and the Navy guy didn't have his quota. But a couple of my friends were in the Army, and I had an idea that we'd all be together. I didn't know they were all over the country. I never saw them again, anyhow. And I thought we'd all meet somewhere. So the Army guy took me. So that's how I could have been the Marines. And today you have to enlist in these services.
Right.
But then they were very desperate. So,
Right. So you were actually drafted?
I was drafted.
You finished high school?
Yeah, they
You were
sent me
drafted.
back. Yeah, okay, and they gave me, after I was sworn into the Army on June 17th, they gave me 2 weeks to go back and finish high school.
Oh, good.
So I finished high school, and then I think July 1 or somewhere around there, I had to report to Camp Upton on Long Island for a week, and then they give you uniforms and all your gear that you need.
Now, is that what you would call boot camp, going to Camp Upton?
No, that's
No.
just a I don't know what you call it.
The staging area?
A center, like a service center to give you the equipment.
Gotcha.
Nothing to do with the Army. In fact, they didn't even call us privates then. In Camp Upton, we would call yardbirds, like you were the lowest thing there was on earth.
Oh.
But anyhow, from there, they shipped me to Fort Knox, Kentucky, Armored Force Replacement Training Center, AFRTC, where we were to train to be replacements for armored divisions, either infantry, artillery, or armor, which is tanks. And we had, I think, about 16 weeks of basic training. And we had a tough basic training. We had what they call a range of basic training, and at that time it was considered the toughest one there was. It was very tough. But, being young, and it was good, I enjoyed it, in fact.
Yeah. Can you
But it
give
was
us some
hard.
idea what kinds of things that you did during
Well,
the
a
training?
lot of marching and drilling, and then we spent, I guess, first thing they got us on a rifle range, and I think I told you, I'd never fired a gun in my life,
Exactly.
And in 2 or 3 weeks, I was an expert with the M1 rifle. And they said they'd rather have it that way, the cadre, the instructors, because they taught me from scratch. There was no shooting coons in Kentucky and coon guns and that stuff. And they didn't make the best shots because they had their own way of shooting. And I became expert with the rifle. And then part of the basic training was, of course, a lot of drilling and instructions and classes and map reading and night courses. And then there was 3 weeks on the driving range. And being in an armor division, you had to know how to drive vehicles. And I never drove before, neither. But they were also happy with that. In 2 or 3 weeks, I was driving Peeps, Jeeps, trucks, half-track, light tank, medium tank. I could drive any vehicle the Army had. It's amazing what they can teach you in basic, but you had instructors. And then you had to qualify on one vehicle just to be licensed. It was just like grabbing it. So lucky me, I grabbed a Sherman tank, medium tank, which I had trained on anyhow. And in the daytime, we had gone over these tank courses with traps and everything simulated. And the test was, it was a night course over the same area we had gone in the daytime, but you had a cadre with you. And here's a 30-ton tank, you know. And I'm a little skinny kid from Brooklyn. But I got through it, and the tank in front of you, simulating combat, had nothing in front of but a bicycle light. You just saw this little tail light. I see. And you know, when that disappeared, he was going down into a so-called tank trap. And you had to learn how to double clutch, because the tank was, I think it was 2, 3, 4, 5, and at first reverse. With a big gear shift, and you had a clutch. And you had to learn how to double clutch. It came up 2, 3 up easy, but when you wanted to go from 4 to 3, the gears would grind. So they had, I don't know if you have a double clutch, but okay. You had to slow the engine down so the gears would slip in. And then going along, and all of a sudden, when I saw the other tank, I knew my trap was coming, and I shifted down, and you had to gun it to get it up, because if you didn't, you could tip over. 30 tons, it could tip over backwards to get out.
So you weren't going fast enough.
Yeah, if you had a gun it coming up. And it was quite, I think that's why I started getting my gray hair.
Now, what was the object of this? You were being tested?
Yeah, well, you had to qualify. We could drive all vehicles. Not great, but we could do, if we had to, I could jump in a truck or half track, and I could drive it. Sure. But you had to qualify on one vehicle. Some guys drew trucks. I happened to drew the Sherman tank, the M1, I forget the numbers of it. Anyhow, I passed it, and they gave me a license that I was officially a Sherman tank driver. But
how long, it took 2 weeks to get that?
No, just this, the one test, this night driving test. Yeah. So I got the license, which I never got to use because I didn't end up as a tank driver. Yeah. So anyhow, I think we had about 16 weeks of basic training, and then we were given a delay in route to go home. It was around Thanksgiving. I went home for about a week, and they called it a delay in route. It wasn't a furlough. They gave you 10 days to delay getting to the next camp, which was Fort Meade in Maryland. And that was like a staging area. And there, any equipment that you weren't up to, they re-equipped you with everything, helmets and everything. And then from there, I was only there about a week or two. It's near Baltimore. On the weekend we went into Baltimore. And then from there, in December, they shipped, I was shipped to Camp Miles Standish outside of Boston. Mm-hmm. And that's a port of embarkation. That's where anybody that's going overseas, they have different camps just for that. And I was there about a week or two, and then we heard the 4th Armored Division was coming in to ship overseas. That's when everybody got nervous. We were all replacements there.
I see. Okay, but why were there replacements for people going out?
Well, a lot of divisions, you're talking 20,000 men in the 4th Armored. A lot of men, when they heard they're going overseas, they went AWOL, they faked sickness, they just...
They got scared.
They got scared. They didn't want to go overseas. They were afraid. Right. And so they lost a lot of men. And mostly from AWOL. They just disappeared. They didn't want to go overseas.
Right, they haven't gotten into combat yet. Or
No, but they would, once everything was okay in the States, but once you heard you're going overseas to England or wherever we were headed, a lot of men just couldn't take it. So that's why we were trained. I was trained for infantry. Part of the basic training, we took infantry training, and we had to learn house-to-house fighting. You know, they had actually little cities set up, and you would attack homes and kick open doors, and that was the infantry training,
right.
And had machine guns and all that. And then part of the tank training, so we could go into the artillery. See, the Armored Division has 3 battalions of tanks, 3 battalions of artillery, 3 battalions of infantry. And then support units, tank destroyer units, medical units, quartermaster unit, ordnance, and that makes up your 20,000 men. So we were trained to do everything, these 3 combat parts. And to get us used to artillery training, they had this firing range where it was a tank with it was 75 millimeter gun, and then they had targets out there, and they taught us to fire at these targets like 2,000 and 3,000 yards away. And what you had to do, a tank, it's got the driver, a bar gunner, he's the machine gunner next to the driver. Then there's a loader, a gunner, and a tank commander. There's 5 men. So you had to do all these parts as part of this training. You had to be the loader, which is scary. You had to take a big shell and stick it in a breech, and when you got it in, this breech pushed you away. It looked easy, but when you did it, you got a little scared. Because you figured, this thing ever caught my hand, I'm gone. So then you had to be the gunner. When the commander gave you orders, you did the firing, and then you only did what he. So the commander, when you're the tank commander, you see a target. So you say gunner. Say the target is a tank shot, which is armor piercing, or HE, which is high explosive. You told him what shell. He's got a big rack of like 100 shells. And these are big babies. They're like that high, 75 millimeter. And then the gunner would tell the loader armor piercing, and then it would go into the gun. And then the commander, with his glasses, would give you the range. He's talking to the gunner. The range, the left or right, a lot of instructions, which are all marked on his glasses. Right. And then when everything was set, the commander he's up in the turret looking, he tells the gunner to fire, and they press a button. And the shell goes out. So when you're the commander, when that baby fires, the whole tank rocks back. So you got to throw your glasses up, and you can actually see the round in the air. Yeah. Big shells don't go that fast. Yeah. You can just follow it, and then you see it land, and say your target was a truck or a tank. Well, if you see the smoke and you don't see your target, you're short. Okay. If you see the target and the smoke isn't back, it's simple. You're long. Yeah. So the next shell you try to put in the middle. You bracket the bracket. I think I told you the Navy fires. Bracket, yeah. The Navy fires that way. Right. One short, one long. Right. And then, and then I think I told you, if you didn't, you had to sense the round when you were the tank commander. So the captain in charge of this firing range, if you threw it back and you couldn't give anything, you missed the round. You didn't sense it. They charged you $17.50 for the round and took it out of your pay. Out of your pay. So if I missed it, I called anything. I'd say short, long. At least I said something. Yeah. But we got good at it. We got so good that after about the second or third week, if you were the tank commander and you knew that you got to know the distance, 2,000 yards, 3,000 yards, and you give the gun, he bang, one shot. Yeah. You were hitting it. That's how you had to hit in combat. Yeah. In combat, you don't get a bracket system. You got to hit because the Germans were pretty tough babies. They knew they had been in France for 4 years. They knew every range, so as soon as one of our tanks popped his nose out, and
now there were 5 of you in the tank. You all took turns receiving the training at the different positions.
Yes, so in case you got in combat, you could take any position. You could be the gunner, you could be the commander. Right. But usually the commander is a sergeant or a staff sergeant, and the rest of them are privates, whatever, But you had to be ready to do each position. Right. And the main thing is you had to know what it is to feel like a shell. So we were ready for the artillery, we had infantry training,
Right.
and we had armor, you know, driving tanks. So we were ready for the 3 parts of an armored division as replacements. So the 4th Armored had trained in this country for about 2 or 3 years. They had been in Tennessee, Texas, California. They were a well-trained outfit. So when they pulled into Camp Standish, that was a real ready combat division. And that's when we all got the lump because we knew we were going overseas. But anyhow, they put me into, I forget what I was replacing the colonel's driver of the 35th Tank Battalion. Had gone AWOL when he left.
Oh.
So I was to be the colonel's driver, which I knew when we got to England, I'd never get that job.
Yeah.
You know, all the old timers had 3 years with the division. Anyhow, so then we sailed out of Boston, freezing cold, and I remember standing on the pier there, and we overcoats.
Is this in December of 1943?
December 43, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, basic training was over.
Okay.
And we were getting ready to, they were standing on a pier, it was freezing, it was a cold winter that year, and the Red Cross ladies were coming around giving us coffees, and I remember one of them, she says, "Soldier, would you like a sewing kit?" You know, I couldn't sew a button. So I said, "Sure." She gave me a little sewing kit, I put it in my pocket. What I really wanted to do was go home. Anyhow, we boarded the ship, and we were so loaded with, we had a barracks bag and a duffel bag loaded with everything you owned, overcoat, helmet, carrying a rifle, a gas mask bag, you know, and I weighed about 150 pounds then, you know, for basic training. You lose 20 pounds in a hurry. There was no fat guys in basic training because they run the pants off. In fact, to pass the final shot at basic training in Fort Knox, they take you on a 25-mile hike at night. You start out in the evening, and then you march till sunrise. 25 miles. You stop 5 minutes every hour, and because they have medics come up to break your blisters, you know, you're 25 miles. There's a lot of miles.
On your feet.
On your
the
feet.
blisters on your feet.
Yeah. And so, anyhow, we all passed it, and in fact, we had a gung-ho lieutenant who was in charge of my group, and he marched us all the way around. He took another route all the way around Fort Knox, and when we got back, they told us we marched 30 miles that night from sunset. Today, I get on a treadmill for a half hour, I'm dead. So anyhow, so we all then you passed, but you had to pass that 25-mile hike. I don't know, everybody did. We had to drag guys along. I don't know what you did, whether you had to do basic training. It was like whether it was like getting left back in school, but I don't know. But anyhow, that was it.
But you would drag guys along that were
falling
behind.
So,
You had a real team effort. Is
yeah. Oh yeah, it was a team effort. You practically pulled towards the end. You know, like when after 20 miles, people are pretty tired. So we were actually helping each other, you know. Yeah. And so then when you got in, you went up to your barracks and you laid on a cot, and medics came around breaking blisters, and everybody, they just lancing blisters, because your feet can't take 30 miles. No. So anyhow, and then some wise guy told me, wear 2 pairs of socks, it was good for you. What happened is, one slid under the other and made a lump. I like to get that guy. So that's all, you know, it's all experience. But anyhow, back to the, we sailed out of Boston, and I was so loaded, we all were so loaded with stuff, you had to go up the gangplank to get on this stupid ship. I couldn't make it up, so they had sailors on each side of the gangplank, and they would grab you one by one, up you, they pushed you and pulled you, and in fact, they fell on the deck. You know, there's a lot of weight there, you know.
How much weight do you think that you were carrying?
I carried about 60, 70 pounds with a rifle and all that junk on you, an overcoat and a steel helmet. And, you know, everybody was skinny. There was no fat guys in those days because after basic training. So anyhow, we got on the ship. We were 2 weeks heading for England, 2 weeks to go from Boston, England. But I think I told you, it was the German subs were going crazy, and we were in the North Atlantic in December. That's a rough ocean, and we went up towards the North Pole, back down, and in a convoy of 200 ships. It was the largest convoy ever went over the ocean. 200 ships loaded with men, and because the Navy was protecting us, in the daytime we could see the Navy ships out there. They were escorting us, so no subs, but in the daytime they let us go up on deck, and the captain would announce, he says, anybody on the port side, that's the left side, you watch for icebergs, and the men on the right side watch for subs. So I think I said, I'm not watching anything. I'm going down to some crap games down there in the hole, and I went down, played crap for almost 2 weeks, and you couldn't eat. Everybody was sick. Everybody was throwing up all over the place. And a lot of guys, I think I told you, like guys from Ohio, Indiana, and all these little, they never saw anything bigger than a lake or a river. And here they are in this North Atlantic, and the ship's going under and up. And half of the ship, I think, was in sick bay.
Now, you did fairly well, though, as far as
I did nothing. Because I had been living in Brooklyn, Sheepshead Bay, which is the Atlantic Ocean. I had gone out on a fishing trip. My father had taken me as a kid, so I knew what rough water was.
Okay.
But so I never got sick, and I think a lot of it's mental too. If you let yourself. But anyhow, guys were yelling, "Shoot me, kill me!" They were so sick, they wanted to die. They were actually green, and 2 weeks of this nonsense, and finally somebody was like Columbus. Every morning, every guys were, "Where the hell is the land?" Finally, after two and a half weeks of being on the North Atlantic in December, we saw the tip of Ireland, I guess. And everybody was cheering like we discovered Europe or something. So
Columbus in reverse.
Yeah, so we landed in Bristol. We came down the Irish Sea and we landed in Bristol. There's a bay of Bristol, and that's where we disembarked. And when we pulled into the dock, everybody's looking down at the longshoremen. So this one little English longshoreman, Limey we call him, he looks up, there's 1,000 men looking over the side, so happy to be on land. He says, "You're a little late, Yanks. The war's almost over." So, geez, everybody. So one guy, he must have been from Brooklyn, he says, "You Limey, son of a so-and-so, we didn't come to fight, we come over to get your women." And 1,000 guys cheer, and he's looking up, he didn't know what to say. That was the best answer I ever heard in the world. He gave a good answer. So then we went from Bristol to they railroaded us to my 35th tank, a little town, Devizes in England, which is just southwest of London. And then we trained from January into June. We trained on the Salisbury Plains, which was big. It was good for tank training. And I ended up, I never got to be the colonel's driver. So everybody wanted that.
You had that figured out from the beginning.
Yeah, I knew that. Yeah, so I ended up in a Recon platoon for the tank battalion, which wasn't, I didn't like that, but it was kind of scary when you hear Recon. Anyhow, we trained on the English, on the Salisbury Plains, which is like the moors, nothing grows, but that was the tank training. And my platoon, we had a first lieutenant was the platoon leader, then we had a staff sergeant, and we had about 25 men. And we'd go out every day and assimilate, looking for enemy positions, right, and where gun emplacements could be, and different, to get experience at trying to find out what an enemy might have. But it wasn't combat, it was. And then our lieutenant would find little, in the little English little pubs, and he'd take us there for lunch, and we'd play darts, and then he'd go back and tell the colonel, "Oh, we did it, we were," but we really trained.
Yeah. What else did you do for entertainment, or?
Well, at night, the food was horrible we were in England. Oh, it was Spam, every meal. They fried it, they baked, they tried to trick you, but it was still Spam. And there wasn't that much food, peas and food was scarce. And the English people, so at night, the little town of Devizes was about a mile, so we'd all walk in at night after chow, and they'd go to fish and chip stores. There was plenty of them. They'd get fish and chips. And in those days, they took the fish and they wrapped it in old newspapers, so the ink would get on the fish, but who cared? They didn't have wax paper or anything.
Oh, okay.
But we were happy. And then French, you know, the chips. And that was it. That was basically it. And I think they had a movie in town. And, you know, every night the guys couldn't wait to get out of camp and walk in. But sometimes, and then we hit the pubs, naturally.
Yeah.
We went to all the pubs and we hung out in certain pubs and we started playing darts. And the old men, the Englishmen, elderly men who weren't in the service, they would be in there. And first they resented us. You know, they Yanks, you know. And then they got to like us. And then everything was beer. We used to drink half and half, which is half bitter and half beer, and warm. England, no ice. I don't think today that you can't get an ice cube in England.
Yes, you can.
You can, but
Yeah.
and they don't have air conditioning. They don't have all that stuff.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so at night we'd go in and we'd play darts and stuff like that. And then after a while, the bartender got to know you. If you came there a lot, and he'd say, "Hey, Yank, would you like a drink of scotch?" So we'd say, "Sure." So he'd he'd give us, you know, we got friendly then, you know.
But they kind of resented you at first.
At
Do
first,
you know why? Is it just
well,
because
not
you
the-
invaded their locale?
No, yeah, because
You know,
they heard
there's
so
too many
much
strangers.
They heard so much about us, you know, the Yanks this, the Yanks that, you know, and they didn't know that much about us, you know. But the English soldiers hated us because they said we were overpaid, and overfed. I was making $50 a month. I don't know what they were making, but I was making more than them. They did like us. And naturally, they had canteens and they had girls, and the girls, you know, like RUSO, and they would dance with the guys. And the English soldiers, the Tommies they call them, they'd be dancing with a girl, and we were used to cutting in and tap money. He says, "We don't cut in over here, Yank." Well, then the next thing, pushy, next fist fights, chairs flying around the place. And they resented us because we were overpaid, and we probably ate better than them, and we were getting the girls. The girls thought we were terrific because we had cigarettes, chocolate bars, gifts, things from home. The girl, you know, and they just really, they dropped the English soldiers. Not all of them, but they came, and we danced, and we did the jitterbug.
Oh, boy.
And they liked all. They really went crazy for the American soldiers. The girls did. And the British guys hated us. In fact, after a while, things got so rough in the dances that the canteens would have signs out, Tommies and Canadians welcome, and underneath, Yanks not welcome. Right in the Yanks not welcome. Here we were over there, 3,000 miles, to try to save them from Hitler, and they wouldn't let us in the canteen. So there was a lot of hard feelings, but a lot of it was our fault, you know. The paratrooper guys, they were always looking for a fight. They did at least, you know, and the British guys, you know, they fought this all the way, and by the time they did that, they were knocked out, you know. They fought like, they were gentlemen.
I remember when we were talking before, you had made a comment about what you thought about going into the service, that you thought it was just another big fisticuff fight.
Yeah,
that
well, I did.
You guys were,
Yeah.
you know, on the streets of Brooklyn or whatnot, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not implying that you were part of a gang, but, you
No.
know, it was kind of, it was part of your youth, you know. You had to be kind of rough and tough.
Oh, yeah.
You know, at home, as a teenager, in high school.
I told you, I was brought up in the streets.
Yeah.
And if you couldn't fight, fist fight,
Right.
You were a sissy, and everybody picked on you.
Yeah.
So I was just 6 years old. My father bought me boxing gloves for Christmas, and he taught me how to box. You didn't have to be good. You just had to show that you would fight. We got black eyes, bloody noses. Nobody got killed or hurt. It was part of growing up. Who was the toughest guy in the class? Who was the toughest guy on the block? And he'd always be getting challenged, but nobody got hurt, really. It was just...
But going into the service, you sort of had this impression that was another big fight.
That's it.
But at what point did it change?
And, well, when we realized that they were using guns instead of fists.
Okay.
We didn't, you know, it was just another big fight.
Sure.
And, you know, and that's the way we were brought up.
Yeah.
And we were brought up in cities like that, in the streets, and we were all poor. I was brought up in tenement-type houses, you know.
Right.
And everybody was poor, and the kids used to just fight each other for the heck. We'd wrestle, and, you know, there's something to do.
Right.
And because we didn't have little leagues and all the little things these kids have today. We played baseball in old fields with rocks for bases, and the outfield, when they came in, And you had to go, they give you their gloves, we switched gloves, there was
Right.
nothing, you know. Old baseballs that when you hit them, they came apart.
Right.
It was a different generation.
Yeah.
But we were brought up, we like to fight.
Yeah.
Not to kill anybody, just we like to box.
Yeah.
That's how boys are. And so that's when we, then, okay, I'll go on then.
Yeah,
That was
go
part of it.
ahead.
I'm glad you
Yeah.
brought that up because
Yeah,
we
and
just,
I remembered that.
yeah, so we weren't afraid to go because we
Right.
thought, well, here's another fight, you know,
Exactly.
and we're going to win. We're going to beat those Japs. We're going to beat Hitler and all that, but not with fists.
As you found out.
When I found those tank shells flying out, I knew it wasn't fists anymore.
Yeah.
We had to go through infiltration courses in part of basic training.
Oh, okay.
They had a machine gun, live ammo, a guy, and they had like a wire meshing, and you had to crawl across, and he was firing live rounds over your head. You had to crawl across like 100 yards, and you had to go like that, and cradle a rifle. And they had mud in there and simulated dead cats and to scare you,
Right.
if you had to creep at night in combat. And these bullets are winging over your head. If you stood up, you were dead.
And it was live ammunition during the training.
They were just
Yeah.
spraying the whole area. If you stood up, you were dead. I never heard anybody get killed. I know I wouldn't stand up, but a lot of guys panicked and they could jump up and you get killed. And then when you got to the end of it, and there was a lieutenant there, and you had to fire around with the rifle. And boy, I said, here we go. I know I had mud in the barrel. I said, oh, here, me and him are going to get blown to schmither. So I put it, and it fired. I said, thank God it fired. I thought the mud was going to blow the whole gun up.
Sure.
But that was it. Then to top it off, you had to, this way we're going across this thing, the infiltration course they go, and he's firing this way. Then they had a tougher one at the end of your training. You had to crawl towards the gun. It's scary stuff, but we were trained for that, you know. But that was part of it. You had to pass all these tests. Basic training is tough.
Right.
We had to swing on ropes over streams like you see, and if you let go, you ended in the water.
Right.
And you had to do a lot of climb over walls that high, run and try to get over it. It was very hard.
Sure.
But being a kid, you could do all this stuff. Anyhow, so we in England, as we went in, as I say, we trained. Everything was training for the invasion, and we didn't know when that was coming. So we trained from January right into June, in England there. And then when the invasion was on June 6th in '44, you couldn't land an armored division. They had to be inland.
Now, when you're talking about the invasion, is this the Normandy?
Normandy
This is the
invasion.
Normandy invasion?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was Omaha Beach, Utah, and the English had Gold Beach or something down. They gave them the easy beach. Because they weren't that great fighters, the English, you know. They had fought 100-year wars, you know, over the centuries, but they weren't that terrific fighters, you know. They weren't gung-ho to fight, you know. And I'm not belittling them. They lost a lot of men, too. But the 1st and the 29th Infantry Division hit Omaha, and the 4th Infantry Division hit Utah Beach, which was a little further down the coast. And so we couldn't get our division, the 4th Armored Division, until they were well inland, of at least 5 or 6 miles. So we landed around towards the end of June, I'll say, the division. But when we landed, this 4th Infantry who had hit Utah, they were still bringing their dead back and piling them up on the beaches because they were the front line. And we saw that. We knew that there was a war going on here. You know, it was getting kind of scary. We could hear artillery fire in the distance and machine gun firing at night. And they just brought us into apple orchards just to keep cover because the Luftwaffe would come out at night and strafe, and you didn't dare light a cigarette or anything. They'd just drop a bomb right on that spot. And so they were pumping, not only my division, but they were pumping men in by the thousands. And they only had a small area because the front was only maybe 5 or 6 miles inland. And it had stopped at this little town of St. Lo. That's where the Germans held, and it was a stalemate at St. Lo. And then I think I told you, well, we just waited around, you know, for something to happen. We knew we were going to relieve this 4th Infantry because we were armored and we could move, see. So this one day, we're on the beach, not the beach, but inland in there. we heard this droning of like 10 billion bees. And everybody's running out of their tents and everything, looking up. And we see that bombers, fortresses, liberators, all coming across the channel, bombing the front line of the Germans at St. Lo.
Was this our
Hundreds.
Air Force? And
Our
the
Air
world?
Force, our Air Force.
Our Air Force.
Hundreds and hundreds. They would drop their bombs, go back to England, load up. This went on practically all day long. It was the biggest air raid in the history of the world. And I'm just, well, why, we don't know what's going on, you know. We say, well, we knew it was for the bombing the German lines to break this breakthrough up. And the little fighter planes scooting in and out, oh, probably protect them. The Luftwaffe didn't come up. But the sky was so filled with planes that the aircraft from the German guns, you couldn't miss. There was just so many bombs. And they were hitting the bombers, a lot of them, not all of them. And then they were way up, and we'd see the little puff of smoke coming out of the bomber. And then hopefully you'd see the little chutes coming out. Yeah. And a lot of times you didn't see the chutes and just right down, you know. Yeah. It was like, it's unbelievable. You had to see it. You couldn't believe this was happening. Yeah. The sky filled with bombers all day long going around. Anyhow, but the lines were so close when they dropped their bombs, they killed a lot of Americans because, you know, the bomb, they just can't pinpoint bombs. But they did a lot of damage to the German lines, and that's where my division moved in, the 4th Infantry, we relieved them, and we broke through. We broke through the lines, and we had them on the run through northern France. And we got out of Normandy into Brittany, and then we started capturing cities like Rennes, Vence, different names, just below Paris, but we never got into Paris. That was politics. De Gaulle wanted to come in first and all that junk, you know. The French wanted to liberate it. So we kept going, and we liberated cities like Orleans, which Joan of Arc was born. She's the maid of Orleans, Nancy. And we had the Germans on the run. They stopped and fought a lot, and it was casualties. But basically we had them going back.
Now, did you work with the French resistance at all and come into contact with them?
Well, we did, but we had bad experiences with them. We kind of disregarded with them, the French underground. I think I told you, they gave us so much bad information. They would tell us, say we were going after trying to capture the city of Nancy or Orleans, big cities. They would tell us the city is clear, there's no mines leading in, all the Krauts or the Germans had left, and there's no sniper fire. And my platoon, we'd go in ahead of the main column, and my best buddy was in a Peep in front of me. He was a driver. He got blown up right in front by a mine. He got cut in half with the steering wheel. And a couple of men were killed. And from then on, we hated the French underground. When they came and said, we said, go away. It's not like the Hollywood movies. They're all doing such great work. It's a lot of baloney. They did nothing. Take it from me. They were no help at all. And so all they wanted from us, American cigarettes and blah, blah, blah. And if they were any good, they would have stopped Hitler in the first place. We wouldn't have been there, right? They had, I think the Maginot Line had, they had 2 million men. And facing Germany, Hitler walked around them. He went to the Ardennes where they had no protection, Belgium, and he got in back of them. He was in back of them. That was the end of France. And he took Paris in about a week. So if they were so good, what good were they in the underground? We were here to do our job. And so we had very bad experiences. We had, in fact, a lot of times, it's not like Hollywood, you know, they're blowing up German trains and they're doing this and great. If they blew up a German troop train and any German soldiers got hurt, the commander of that area just went to the nearest town, took all the men out and lined them up, and whew, that was that. So what did they gain killing a few German soldiers? They were blowing up munition dumps. But Hollywood gives them this big build-up, which is a lot of crap, really, a lot of junk, my opinion. But I was
But the
there.
Germans, in retaliation, would then go in to a town, civilians,
Yeah,
whatever.
kill the men. They just blow the town up. So what good did they gain? So this underground, it was actually FFI, Free French of the Interior, they called themselves. And it was useless. They were no help to us. We did our own reconnaissance work. And after they gave us some bad information on some of these cities where And then we would get into them, there was sniper fire, the Germans hadn't even left. So it was crap stuff.
Was this when you first encountered your own sort of hand-to-hand combat or close combat experiences? Was in France or
Yeah,
was
well,
back on the...
Oh, well, I'm ahead of myself because in Normandy, when we broke through, we ran into the hedgerows. I don't know if you heard that. But all Normandy is like wine fields and everything. But they have these hedgerows with hedges as high as this ceiling that have been there for 1,000 years, and they have roots, and the tanks couldn't get through. So the tanks, what they had to do was put like a big fork on the front of the tank and try to just keep pushing and make openings to push some of this hedgerow so the tanks, armor could get through. Because armor can't stay on the highways. You're a dead target for planes. So you have to go through the fields. So the fierce fighting was in the fields of Normandy. And the Germans, as I say, they knew the range. And as the Sherman tank would pop his nose through, hundreds of Sherman tanks were laying all over Normandy, all over the fields, due to this hedgerow nonsense. They couldn't get through. In groups, they had to come through one or two at a time, and they were getting picked off. And the Germans had this 88 millimeter gun, which is the most deadliest gun I think man ever created. It was we had a 75 on our tanks, which was bouncing off the German tanks, wouldn't even penetrate them. This 88, their armor piercing, could go right through the front of a Sherman tank, which is a lot of armor, go right through, just decapitate the crew, and even come out the engine in the back. That's the velocity of this gun.
Wow.
Tremendous gun. We feared it. It was a horrible, horrible gun. Had we had that weapon, it would have been a short war. But we had these 75s, and they could hit it. This 88 could actually hit a Sherman on the side and tip it. A 30-ton tank, tip it on its side. So a lot of men were getting killed. We call them steel coffins. So thank God I ended up in a Recon platoon and not in
the tanks.
Not in the tanks. So which my job was tough enough, but I didn't want to be in a steel coffin. Anyhow, hundreds of Shermans were laying all over the fields of Normandy, but we had the States were sending them over. Luckily, you can't win a war without a mass-producing country, a manufacturing country. You can't win. You've got to have replacements coming over for equipment and men even. And so anyhow, there was fierce fighting in that hedgerows. And finally, our division and other division, we broke through and we started the rat race across France. No more hedgerows, it was just plains and city after city we captured. And my platoon had a lot, what we had to do, I think I told you, an armored division is, when they attack a city, they form 3 combat commands, CCA, CCB, and CCR, which means Combat Command A, B, and R means reserve. So when they attack a city, say you're attacking Horseheads, they would come in, A and B would come in on 2 sides and attacking, and R stays back. In case one of them is in trouble, they can move in. But a lot of times the Germans were smart, and they would come around and attack CCR. They were supposed to be in reserve, and they had the most fighting, but it happened. Yeah. And then that's how they fought. So every day, you will put in a different combat command. G2, which is division intelligence, would tell you, up ahead, there's the 4th Panzer Division, there's a Wehrmacht infantry, all German. They would tell you what you could expect to meet. And then they form the combat commands, and every day you're in a different combat command. It'd be like 2 companies of tanks from the 35th Tank, two battalions of infantry from the 51st Infantry, and that formed maybe 5,000 men. That was the combat command. So that's how they fought. And our job in the Recon platoon, in the combat command, we rode with a light tank company, and ahead of the main column, and we reconnoitering to see what is up ahead, and actually to draw enemy fire. And that wasn't a lot of fun, trying to draw fire. I mean, like asking a guy, "Would you shoot at me?" But we got skilled at it, and we had to be good map readers. We had to know our maps and compasses, and every day you would get a map from the aerial photographs. They would give them to the division. It would be handed out, and every morning you had an objective. Like today, we're going to capture Elmira, and sometimes you got 100 yards if you were lucky, and some days you did capture it. And that's how it went from town to town, city to city. And our platoon, we had to reconnoiter. And a lot of times the enemy would let us through because they know we were just a small unit, and they didn't fire at us. And we'd report back that we saw nothing, and the column would start to move, and then they got the heck pounded out. But they the fight started, and we'd be out on the limb. We couldn't get back to our main unit, so we weren't fighters. All we had was Peeps, and we had a half-track, an armored car, and basically it was just 25 men with no heavy equipment. We had no heavy guns. We had machine guns mounted on the hoods, 30 caliber. And we had no windshield. We had to lay them down flat. In order, the gun was on a swivel on the hood. With the windshield, you couldn't fire, so we had no windshield. So when driving one in the cold weather, it's hit you, everything's hitting you in the face. But our job was not really to fight, but a lot of times we had to fight. We ran into enemy recon units going the other way, and we kind of avoided them if we could. They let them do their job, we'll do ours. But sometimes we met head on, and we had a lot of fighting, and you know, machine guns, rifle fire, and sometimes we even fixed bayonets and charged them, like in World War One. That's when I said, gee, I wish I was home with my mother when they charged you with a bayonet. Yes. But anyhow, you get tougher and tougher as you go through it. You become, and we were lucky though. My platoon, a P-51 plane, our plane, had been shot down in the field. He had to land. And we rode over there, and luckily the pilot was okay. He was about a 20-year-old kid, our pilot. He was all right, but the fighter planes have 50 caliber machine guns in the wings. So we were able to get 150 caliber off his wing, and we mounted it on one of our Peeps. And we ran into German platoons. The 30 caliber machine gun, it's this baby, just the noise of it would make him surrender. 50 caliber, that's a big baby. And it could pierce 3 inches of a tree, it could pierce armor. That 50 caliber bullet was a good, and we ran into these patrols. Once we fired the 50, they all come running out. Comrade, they had enough. They thought we had a secret weapon. But there was a lot of fighting, and there was a lot of killing on both sides. And so that was basically our job, recon, constantly going ahead of the column and running into a lot of, we lost a lot of men. My recon platoon turned over 3 times with killed and wounded. That's 3 times we rotated. And they'd be sending us kids over from the States as replacement. Kid was in New York City 2 weeks, and here he is up in combat. You know, a real green kid. And I was 19, and I guess I was a corporal then, and they put some men under me, and I'm trying to protect these kids and keep me alive and them alive. But I was combat experience, you know. If you're in combat, you get good at it. You know, you become a real. Then you are a soldier.
Now, what did you do to become corporal?
A
leading question.
In France, my corporal, his name was Joey DiPaolo. He got killed. I heard a shell came over. See, when the tanks are fighting, we can't get involved. We're in the back, maybe a mile or 2 back. But when tanks miss each other, like say the German Tiger tank would fire at that Sherman, if he didn't hit it, that shell keeps going. And it would land in the rear lines, where we were. So we were, even though you weren't on the front line in the tank fighting, you could still get hit by shells that missed. High explosive or armor piercing. Armor piercing won't hurt you because when it lands, it just digs into the ground. But high explosive hits the ground, that's a big baby. And these are 88 millimeters, they're big shells. And we heard this when we were in the field, and I heard it go. I was talking to some guys, and I heard it go over. It went shoo. And my corporal, he was with a group over there, and it landed right near him. And I think it took a big gash out of the shrapnel to the side of his head. And they whisked him into an ambulance, and they said he died going back to the rear.
So they made you corporal? So
I was standing around minding my own business. What I was his rifleman, actually. Mm-hmm. See, he had a driver, and he was the corporal, and I was the rifleman in the back. You know, so the lieutenant said to me, he said, gee, you're now corporal. So that's how I made corporal. And later on, I made sergeant. I think one of the buck sergeants, I don't know I forget whether he got killed or wounded, but So I didn't do anything to get promoted, except men had to die for me to get, but that's the way a lot of promotions were. You know, somebody had to take the jobs. So I still think of him, Joey DiPaolo, young guy. And so that's it. You were friends with Buddy, like my best buddy. He was the one that got blown up going into this city where the French had told us, and he got blown up. So you lose a lot of your friends, and they keep pumping these kids over, and you know, I'm trying to use my experience to teach them, you know, when to duck, when not to duck. And it got so, we get so experienced at it, we could almost smell the enemy. They had an odor. Maybe we probably did too. Because, you know, there was an odor, and we could almost smell it. They were in this town or in the field, you know. And we'd ask the French. They weren't a very big help. We called them the frogs. We'd say, we could speak the language because when we went into France, they give you a little booklet with thousands of American things, talk, and then the French next to it. So we say, où sont les Boches? The Boches were the Germans. You know, where are the Germans? And the frogs would say, je ne sais pas. The Germans had just left 10 minutes ago. Je ne sais pas, je ne comprends pas. All this, you know, like if you didn't have the right accent through your nose, you know, they didn't know what you were talking about. In fact, I saw a guy one time, he was a big guy from, I think, the 80th Infantry, and he's trying to explain, he's asking the French, this little town, he's asking them for eggs. He's saying, avez-vous des œufs? You know, have you got any eggs? And all the people who gathered around, all the frogs, je ne sais pas, je ne comprends pas. You know, they don't know what he's talking about. So finally he squats down, goes like a chicken, and they all say, and all of them, oh, why didn't you tell us in the first place? Poor guy, he got his egg. So, but they were no help because even though we had the little book, you know, geez, you had to say it. In each town in France has a different dialect.
Right.
And you know, they were really no help. We'd say, où sont les Boches? You know, where'd the Germans go? Oh, say they know nothing. You know. Oh, so we'd say, you got any wine? You've got to give us wine and eggs and forget the whole thing. You know. But as we drove through each little French town, we were liberating, and it was a nice experience because they had been under Hitler for almost 4 or 5 years, and all the town would be out in tanks. We'd roll through it. And the girls are kissing us and jumping on the vehicles, and they were giving us wine and vegetables and bread, old dark brown bread. That's all they had, and but we welcomed because we were eating as K rations and C rations, and they're not delicious, and so they really appreciate us liberating. I mean, we went from town to city, but occasionally the Germans would decide, we're fighting for this town, and then we had a lot of fighting. Tanks had to come in, and infantry, and they captured, you know. So we rolled right across France, and as I say, the longer I was in combat, the smarter I got. The better chance you have to live. You can live a while because you get to sense things. You know if a shell is coming in, you know where to look for enemy emplacements, and you get good at it. It's like everything else. It's a job, and if you do it over and over, so we get good. And then we went into Alsace-Lorraine and going right towards Germany. Alsace-Lorraine is right between France and Germany, you know that. And then they speak both French and German. I don't know who's, every 100 years they go a different way. But, and all of a sudden we stopped, and it was getting into the rainy season. And we had the Germans on the run. We could have gone right into Germany, across their Siegfried line, and we would have been rolling. They were running. And we stopped in Alsace, and nobody knew why. And the whole division, not only our division, but many divisions stopped. And we found out that Montgomery was still fighting back on the coast of France, Caen or Calais, one of those, fighting tank battles with the Germans, and he needed the gas. So, Patton was furious, because all that I'm telling you was Patton's Third Army. And he was furious. He hated Montgomery. He hated the English. So I didn't. So we stopped, and for a couple of weeks, and he got all the gas, so he could come up. This is politics. He wanted to be up even with our lines, and we were 100 miles ahead of him. But when we stopped, the Germans stopped, and they dug then. And the rain came, and the tanks were having trouble with mud and everything. And the fiercest fighting of World War II, as far as I'm concerned, you know, in Europe, was Alsace-Lorraine. It turned it into a nightmare with more men killed and wounded because the Germans dug in and we stopped, and they regrouped. You know, I'm talking armies. And so when we decided, we finally got the go-ahead, it was tough going. They fought, and we were getting towards their homeland, and they fought like buggers, you know. They weren't ready to give up, and Hitler was telling them that they were winning, you know. They didn't know what was, the average soldier doesn't know what's going on, you know. He only knows what he hears. And so there was fierce fighting in there, Metz and Luneville, in fact, a city named Luneville. The Germans pushed us out. I'm talking about the, here's one of the Germans coming down.
Okay. I'm going too long.
No, keep going. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay. So they pushed us out back. Well, looking at, I said, geez, am I dreaming? It was about a mile up the road. They were ready to attack, and they did. They attacked. They pushed us out. I don't know, a town named Luneville. You think all the nuts were in there, but they wanted it for some reason. And when they decided to hold it, they held it. Yeah. So it was fierce fighting, and my platoon lost some people.
Yeah. Can I ask you just to maybe comment a little bit on General Patton?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I saw him 2 or 3 times.
Okay.
Yeah, I saw him. I think I saw when he formed his 3rd Army in France. He formed the 3rd Army, and he picked, it's about 15 divisions. An army is 300,000 men, and 20,000 men to a division. So he picked the division. He picked our division because they were so well trained in the States to be the spearhead division, to lead everything across Europe. And then when he was forming the 3rd Army, he went to each division, and I think I told you, he was up on this big platform, and with 20,000 men in my division, we're out in this big field, and we see the shiny helmet and the revolvers, and he's giving us a speech, and he says, all I remember was, he says, I know you guys don't know why you came 3,000 miles from home to fight this goofy thing over here. He says, but I'll give you a good reason. He says, what American boy doesn't like a good fight? So he says, as long as we're here, let's kill every son of a bee that we can. 20,000 men cheering, you know, I don't know what I was cheering for, but it sounded, but he gave us a reason. We liked a good fight, and that's what I'm telling you, how we were brought up. And I think the kids on the farms, you know, because in basic training, in Brooklyn, if I went 20 blocks away from my neighbor, that was a big trip. You know, if we went to Jersey, it was like going to California. And so here I was meeting kids from the South, the North, California, Arizona. We trained in basic training. They come from all over the country. So you got to know different things, you know. And they all had the same story, basically poor, and brought up, you know, liking fights like all boys did in those days. Now the boys like to rock and roll. Chase girls.
Oh, you didn't chase any girls?
A couple.
Okay.
And yeah, we hated girls. I think until I was went in the army, I didn't even care for girls. You know, everything was sports, and figured the girls were made to jump rope and have, you know, do their thing, play jacks.
Right.
Different story today, but anyhow, he made that. So I saw him then, and I saw him in Alsace. It was so muddy, and they have a rainy season there. It's unbelievable. That all the vehicles were getting stuck, and there was a big crossroad, and they were jammed. And the next thing you know, they said, General Patton's up ahead at the crossroad, and he's breaking the jam up. And sure enough, he was. He was in his vehicle, and he was directing traffic. So we came to him. I told my driver, I said, hit that gas and get the hell by him. He broke the jam up. So I saw him 2 or 3 times, okay, just going by. But he wasn't leading the troops.
Right.
No, he was a great general, but he believed in quick strikes, you lose less men. The British were always slow, let's not lose too many. They don't care if the war lasted 50 years. We wanted to do it, and get it over, and go home, you know. So, in fact, we many times going through France, we'd run into armored division, British armored division. We'd meet, and 4 o'clock in the afternoon with shells flying over and enemy around, they climbed out of their tanks and everything and got a little stove going. They were having tea. 4 in the afternoon. I said, we couldn't. We said, what is this? What? I can't believe this. It's true. They're having tea. And then I said, geez. And then a couple of times we'd run into their British, units, and they'd be held up at a crossroad. A couple of 88s were shelling the crossroad, and they were stuck there for a couple of days. They wouldn't move. Our tanks would come up, go by them. In an hour, we knocked out the guns, and we went right through them.
Sure.
So they were really no help. That's why Eisenhower hated the English. He hated Montgomery. Patton hated them. They all hated because they're not aggressive fighters.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like they're dancing. They do, little tea dances, and we went over there. We were jitterbugging, and and the girls. That's why the girls liked us. We were different.
Right.
We were a different personality. We weren't reserved like they were brought up. A little Lord Fauntleroy,
Yeah.
But that's their country, and they're just as foreign at that time to us as Germany was. They spoke the same language, but it was another world in England,
Right. Now, on your progress here through France and Germany,
Yeah.
You ended up in Czechoslovakia towards the end of the war?
Yeah, I'm getting close to that.
Okay.
Okay, so we were in Alsace, and that's when we were kind of regrouping, getting tanks sent up that we had lost, and new men coming in, getting division up to strength to really go deep into Germany. And the bulge happened. Von Rundstedt broke through it in the Ardennes, just like Hitler did with France. It was open, and he went right through troops we had up there. And he was really doing great. They had about 500,000 men. That was in the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge, that's what it is. Mm-hmm. And Patton got the word from, I guess, Eisenhower to move the Third Army quickly north to fight to stop the Bulge, because they were getting beat badly. The Germans were trying to get through, to get to Brussels, and then they thought they could have done it. They had enough equipment and men, but anyhow, so we were down Alsace-Lorraine, and we had to march over 100 miles to get up into Belgium. And this is in, let's see now, this would be December of 44.
Okay.
44. And the roads were getting icy and everything, but it never was done before, but today it could be done. We moved our whole division, tanks and everything. In 24 hours, we moved 100 miles, which was unheard of in those days. So we were 4 hours from Alsace-Lorraine. We forced march, the whole division, and we got up to Belgium, and then the Germans started throwing shells at us, and we moved up, and Bastogne was surrounded. The 101st Airborne was surrounded, and they were holding the Germans up because they needed to get through Bastogne to get across Belgium to complete their encirclement. And the 101st put up a heck of a fight. They held them off, and our job was to break through the German ring around Bastogne. And I think it was the worst winter that Belgium had in 100 years. Snow like crazy. The guns, we had to keep pulling the bolts back on the machine guns. Even the oil would freeze. It was so cold. So anyhow, I'm just saying my division, but we had infantry divisions on outside. In fact, the 35th Infantry was on our right flank moving towards Bastogne. And that was Harry Truman's old World War I division. He was a captain in the artillery, Harry Truman. It was a good division, infantry, because we respected all the infantry divisions because they do the real house-to-house fighting. They do the hard work, the doughboys. Anyhow, we got up, and through it all, we finally, the division broke through the German, and we got into Bastogne. And actually, that was the end. We broke the Bulge. We broke the Battle of the Bulge was really over. The Germans were defeated. And then from there on in, we went into Germany, and there was some fighting. It was a lot of, like where I won that medal, that was in Germany. Mm-hmm. There was areas, we had to capture city after city, Darmstadt, and we crossed the Rhine. We crossed the Rhine, the Luftwaffe came out again, and we crossed the Rhine on pontoon bridges that the engineers set up, and they had smoke. They put up smoke things, so because the Luftwaffe was strafing the bridge, so that was kind of scary going over the Rhine. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so it was a lot of fighting in Germany. They fought because it was their homeland, and but we were just too superior. They were running out of gas. They were having horses pull their artillery pieces. Mm-hmm. It was ragtag. It was turning into a ragtag army. And it was sad because sometimes we'd be just picking them off like you were at a shooting gallery in Coney Island, you know. But it's the old story. It was kill or be killed, and that's the story of the war. Kill or be killed. And Patton told us that. He said it's kill or be killed, and that's the name of it. It's not Hollywood. It's kill or be killed. 24 hours a day, and my division was in combat 300 days. Like the Gulf War lasted what, a week?
Yeah.
Yeah, 300 days, night and day, contact with the enemy, and they were fantastic with mortar shells. Artillery shells you can hear. You can hear them. If they whistle, they're going over. If you hear like a freight train coming at you, you better hit that ground quick. It's like a wind tunnel. That's the shell cutting through the air. And they were terrific with mortars. The mortar, it's just they just pop a shell in this mortar, and it would only go maybe 50, but they could drop it down in your hat. They were so good, and you couldn't hear them. All you heard was pop, and then you said, "Oh boy, better get out of here." Okay. No noise or it just, and it did a lot of damage. Mortar shells. I had a mortar shell land near me. I guess 10, 15 yards. It landed, and I luckily no shrapnel hit me, but I got thrown up against a wall about 20 feet away from the explosion. You know, these shells. A lot of men don't get hit with shrapnel, but the explosion will kill you. The concussion will just shatter your brains, and your body can't take it. So I think more men got killed in concussion than he did with the shrapnel. And shrapnel, shells are funny. If a shell is coming this way and it hits, the shrapnel is basically going to go that way. And if you're on the ground, with any luck, the shrapnel will fly over you. But if you happen to be standing up, you're gone. And so I've seen so many men with shrapnel. And my platoon, one man, it took shrapnel in his stomach, and his intestines were hanging out. I had to try to push them back in, and he died before the medics could get to them. Shrapnel is horrible stuff. It's just big pieces of steel, and it's got so much velocity, it just
cuts right through you.
Cuts right through you. Anyhow, I never got wounded, but I think I told you that I got hurt a lot. Like if the Luftwaffe would come strafing right at you, and I jumped in a dish, I would hurt my shoulder. And the Germans could throw airbursts where they could have a shell explode over your head rather wait till it hit. They timed it. And it was just like an umbrella. So even if you were in a slit trench or a foxhole, it's coming down on you. Where if you're in a slit trench or a foxhole and the shell hits the ground, it's going to go over you. So you're okay.
I remember you talking about how medals were handed out.
Well, that's what I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to that, yeah.
Okay.
So, as I say, the... and a lot of times these airbursts would hit the ground, these shrapnel hit the ground and throw dirt and stones, hit me in the face, which hurt. I was hurt, and a lot of things, but it wasn't serious wounds. The medics would want to give you a Purple Heart for that. If you hurt my shoulder jumping in the ditch, it was due to enemy action, strafing, and I said, no, I said, gee, a buddy of mine had to lose his eye, or had to get killed, or lose an arm or a leg to get a purple. I said, I'm for a cut on my finger, and they were handing them out like there was coffee and donuts. The medics were, and they really cheapened it. It wasn't fair to the men who deserved them, because you'll hear reading the paper a guy, always a veteran. He's got the Purple Heart with 2 clusters. He's walking around fine. He's playing golf. There's nothing wrong with him. So he got cut on his finger, but he took them. But I goofed because I could have had maybe 10 Purple Hearts. And we coming home when the war was over, it was a point system, and Purple Hearts were worth 5 points. If I only knew, I would have
taken them, right?
I would have taken every one I could get. Oh. They give me a handful, but they cheapened it, and they cheapened a lot of metal. Like the Bronze Star, we had a cook, so he was bringing hot sea rations up to us at night in the lull in the fighting. They gave him the Bronze Star, and so you don't know what to believe in these medals, And because each division, too, wants to give out so many medals. And, so I won't go into that phase. But anyhow, so when we went into Germany, and then as we got deeper into Germany, we were capturing all the cities. And the poor German people, Hitler's propaganda, he was telling them that we were still back in Normandy. They were holding us off. Here we were ready to get into Berlin. And So he organized what they called the Volksarmy, the People's Army. He wanted them to fight with pitchforks and shovels against armored divisions and infantry divisions. So what they did, we said, well, look, we'll have none of that. So they let it be known that as we went into each town or city or hamlet, we wanted a white sheet hanging out the window. That there was no fooling around. Civilians weren't going to be shooting at us for Hitler. And if we didn't see one, we were pulled into, say, Horseheads, and there was no white sheets out. We just pulled a tank, Sherman tank, and stuck his barrel through the upstairs window and fired one round, and goodbye house. You want to see the sheets coming out. They were coming out like crazy. You know, they didn't know. They thought they were winning, even up until the end, the poor people. But the thing I want to get into is, as we went through Germany, we start hitting the concentration camps. They're all over the place. Not Dachau and all the big ones you hear about.
But there were smaller ones,
little Theresienstadt, names never heard, but small, all over Germany. And we would break into them. The Germans had left, but the big one we freed was Buchenwald. That was the big baby. And we came on it so quick that Germans, after they gassed these people and they put them in the open pits from here to a mile down the road, and they're all, and then they covered them up. But they didn't get a chance. We came so quick, they didn't get, and we were pulled in these camps. It was, thousands of men were just laying there, and with the eyes open, and they were all dead. One until they just piled them in. They got them, took them out of chamber. So we saw the chambers, but there was still a lot of people who were, I don't know how they lived. Some of them weighed like 40 pounds. Their eyes were way back in their head. They were like skeletons with little flesh on, but they survived it. I don't know how they did it, but they did. And so then you realize what a horror what Hitler was. He was horrible, And they were making lampshades out of people's skin and cutting gold out of dead people's teeth and stuff. And we saw the chambers, and it was kind of sickening. But I was so hard then, it didn't strike me. Until later on, I realized what a horrible thing it was, You become very hard in the Army. As you see a lot of fighting, a lot of killing, you become hard. And in fact, I think I told you, things got so bad that I was almost wishing to die. Mm-hmm. I figured that's a quick way out. I only had my mother, a couple of girlfriends were writing me letters, no wives. And that's why I was a good soldier, because I took chances. I didn't care if I lived or died. But I'm not criticizing married men, but they don't make the best soldiers. The best soldiers are 18 to 22, single guys. They don't care if they live or die, and they take chances, and they win the wars. They shorten the wars. But married guys, not that I blame them, one guy in my platoon, he was out on a flank, and we were patrolling, and we knew enemy soldiers were out there, and he ran. And he was yelling, "I got a wife and kid." He's running up the road. In World War I could have shot him. That's what they did in World War I. If you were a coward, they didn't call it combat fatigue. They called it cowardice. You were yellow. And they just shot the guy. But we didn't do that. The guy cracked up. So a lot of men were sent back to the rear, and they had to get medical treatment. They couldn't take it, especially if you had kids. They didn't want to die, wife and kids. Single guys are good soldiers. I could say I was a good soldier because I didn't care if I died, but I didn't die. But in fact, I would wish that I could get a leg wound. Enough is enough. You're sleeping in the field day and night. You're sleeping under vehicles. You're always cold. You're always hungry. You're trying to get eggs, trying to find a loose chicken and cook the chicken. You're getting lice. If you sleep on the ground long enough, you get lice. In fact, every once in a while, they would bring trucks up with hoses, and you'd walk through, and they would they were spraying us.
Deloused.
Imagine today the FDA would go crazy. They were delousing us. Yeah. You walk through this truck, and the spray would hit you. It was probably, I don't know what it was. It's a wonder you didn't kill us right there. But to get the lice off you, and it's a dirty. You're filthy all the time, and you're grimy, and you never sleep in beds. You're sleeping in the field. You're sleeping in vehicles, under vehicles. And it's not a fun game.
Holidays come and go.
And on top of all this, you got a nut trying to kill you 24 hours a day. Night and days trying to kill you. I used to sleep, God, I used to sleep with my hand on my my 45, sleeping. If I had a dream, I'd probably kill myself. And you know, you had to be always ready, you know.
I remember asking like about Christmas. You were, like going through Germany. I think it was at Christmas time.
Well, that was
it
the Bulge.
Alsace? That was the Bulge.
That's when we broke through. We
And,
broke through on Christmas Eve of 44.
But Christmas, there
Oh,
was nothing different about
just
Christmas
another day.
Day. Nobody's.
Yeah, and then
Yeah,
going
it's
back to
just-
the Bulge, it was, you know, the Germans had our uniforms. They were wearing, we didn't know who was who. They had captured some P-47 fighter planes. Planes would come over, we thought it was ours, and they'd come down and strafe us. So it was pretty messy stuff. In fact, like when you challenge a guy for a password, say, I'd say to you, look, you knew how to give me the countersign, you'd have to say strike, or old gold, or, you know, or, Heinz ketchup or something like that. You had, so you knew that was in America. But in the Bulge, you had to be more tricky. When you challenged the guy, you'd say, how many homers did Babe Ruth hit? Or what goes with peanut butter? You know, it had to be American. And then only an American would know that, even though German spoke perfect English. He didn't know that, or Joe, how many homers did Joe DiMaggio hit up? Or, you know, things like that. And Americans would know these things. And that's how we picked up a lot of them trying to infiltrate our lines. They had our uniforms and everything, but they didn't know the passwords and the countersigns. So it was tricky stuff. You know, and you think it's your own buddy in the uniform, and actually it's a German soldier. So there was a well-planned attack, that Bulge. I mean, they really put a lot into it, but that was Hitler's last stand. So anyhow, we went through, and then I went through this little town of Furfeld, where I told you where I got my medal from. But you know, I got a medal for that. But I did hundreds of things that was an everyday job with me. You know, going up against tanks, going up against enemy patrols, doing things. One time am I overrunning my time?
No, don't worry about it.
One time, a tank battle was going on. Our tanks were fighting a Panzer division. And we were in the rear, as usual. We can't fight. We're a small unit. We're not into tanks. And every so many tanks has a medic in the tank. In case anybody's hurt, he would take care of them or go to another tank. And the tank got hit by an 88. It killed the crew and killed the medic. So they needed another medic up in the front. So the colonel came to our platoon leader. He was second lieutenant, and he said, "We got to get a medic up to replace the one that was killed." So the lieutenant says, "Who's going to go?" I volunteered. And my driver almost, he turned white. He said, he didn't want to go. And I didn't think the medic wanted to go. So we went up, and in all this tank fighting, we drove up right into the way they're throwing shells, tank battle going on. And I'm riding around, and I couldn't get any of their attention. All the tankers were, the hatches were down, they were buttoned up. And I couldn't, the shells are flying all over the place. I said, why the hell did I volunteer for this? And the poor medic, he must have been dying, because he knew we were going to drop him, and we were going. Anyhow, I had to go, to get their attention, I had to drive in front of one of our tanks, a Sherman tank, and I had to stood up in my Peep, and I'd go like this, and he was, you know, he was firing shells at him. And finally, he got the message, and he opened his hatch, stuck his head out, he waved me, so the medic climbed up the tank, got him into the tank, and we got out of there. But that was, I mean, me and my driver and the medic should have got a medal for that. That was bravery.
Yeah.
But that was an everyday event. I didn't think anything of it, you know. If I didn't volunteer, it's one of the other guys, the other Bucksides would have, or somebody, you know. It had to be done, you know. They needed medics up there. So that was, but that was like everyday stuff, you know. It meant, you know, and we did house-to-house fighting. We got into Germany. If the Germans were defending a town or a village, and we had to go in and get them out, he'd kick open, go like through an apartment house, just kick open the door, or machine gun it, and then you kick the door on. A poor family would be cowering in the corner, men, women, and children, thinking, you know, Hitler told them we were going to kill them all. And, you know, you'd have a machine gun, and I'd see it wasn't their fault. But imagine how those people felt. Would you feel if somebody shot your front door down and came in? And we'd go from house to house. That's what the house-to-house fighting is. It's rough stuff.
Were you taking prisoners, or were you?
Sometimes we would find a family was hiding a soldier or a sailor or a Navy guy in the house. We took him prisoner, you know, and unless he resisted. But it was messy because some days we had found that like our tankers, some of our tankers were captured. They didn't all get killed. If they abandoned the tank, sometimes the Germans would capture them. A lot of times they killed them. But we heard that they lined a bunch of our tankers up against the wall, who were prisoners of war, and just killed them. And the word got through the division. So the next day, word went out, no prisoners today, which is bad, because you're supposed to take prisoners. So as the Germans were coming out of their foxholes, you know, they come out like this. We killed them because it was retaliation. And we didn't look on them as people. They were animals. They probably thought we were animals. There was such a hate. You can't imagine the hate you build up when somebody's trying to kill you night and day after day. You hate that guy, and you want to get him. But then the word got out that, you know, back to division headquarters, you can't kill them all, because if they know you're going to get killed, there's no surrender. This war will go on for years. See, they'll fight till last. If I was going to get captured and they're going to kill me, I'd fight. So we had to back off. But I'm not saying it didn't happen a lot. It did happen a lot. It's retaliation, you know. But people have to realize that it's not a fun game. It's a you hate it from basic training on. They get you hating the army. In fact, they hate your mother for having you. You hate everybody, and then you take this hate into combat. And it's hard to understand that you can get that ferocious, because I'm a mild-mannered guy now.
Well, without it, would you have survived?
No, I wouldn't have. I took chances and I survived. I was lucky too, you know. But it's the breaks. A lot of men came through. A lot of men got killed. A lot of men are wounded. And but I credit my surviving to it being experienced. I knew when to duck and when not to duck, and where the enemy could be, where he wasn't, and with a lot of luck. You know, when a mortar shell lands 15 yards away from you, and you don't die, that's luck. I got hurt, but so anyhow, enough of me.
Oh, we want to hear about you.
Yeah, but that was everyday stuff. We did things like people get medals for one thing, and we were doing things like that. Not me, but a million men, infantrymen doing their job every day. Going foxholes, fighting hand to hand sometimes. That was their job. They weren't getting medals. Nobody was getting. That was the job. That's what they were there for. But occasionally they'd pick something out like I did. They said I saved the column from ambush. Well, maybe I did, but I didn't turn it down. I took it. That was 5 points coming home too, the medal.
How much longer now towards the end of the war? How much further did you have to go from this point?
Then we went through all the towns in Germany, and we captured all the cities, and we got right near Berlin. We were 10 miles from Berlin. I was so happy. With Chemnitz and Dresden. You've ever heard where they make Dresden dolls?
Yes.
That's a city near Berlin. We went through there, and we're 10 miles from Berlin. Next thing you know, we're veering around, and next thing we're going into Czechoslovakia. That's politics again. We weren't allowed to go. Eisenhower and Churchill, the whole group had to fix it up so everybody get into Berlin at once, and the Russians. So we went to Czechoslovakia, and then the war ended there. We ended up at a little town in Písek. I guess that was around April when the war ended. And my platoon was in this Písek, and before the Russians came, I think I told you, this German general came, field marshal, like you see in the movies, the red hat, red cape, big guy, everything red. He controlled like an army. And he came into this town and he said, I have an army out here. We're running from the Russians and we want to surrender to the Americans. So I said, surrender, who cares? But I was only a buck sergeant. He said he only would surrender to an officer. So here I am with this field marshal, one of the biggest guys in the German army. I said, take your men and go back, surrender to the Russians. So we found him, just to keep happy, we found a second lieutenant from a cavalry group, and he's a lot of crap. He formally surrendered, this man. He was still playing the war game, you know, he was general. And so then his men started marching through this town. It must have taken a week. They just kept coming through, pulling horses pulling them, and ragged men wounded with crutches. They were beat. But they didn't want the Russians to capture them, because the Russians would have killed half of them. but it had a sad ending anyhow. We didn't know what to do with all these men. So we just told them, march to the rear, and there was a big field, all kinds, and we put them in, we told them, put up your pup tents and stay there until the MPs can decide what we're going to do, what they do. We were finished. And the Russians came in, right after that, we met the Russians in Pisek. And they were a ragtag army. They all looked like Mongolians, all 18 little kids with little Mongolian features. Mm-hmm. And looked like a bunch of cannibals. And we were dirty looking as it was. We had beards, but they were worse than us. They had tunics, and you could see all the food with they were slobs. They were a dirty looking crowd. And so we met them, and then we with their officers. They thought I was only Buck Sergeant. They must have thought I was Eisenhower because I had some stripes. They were a bunch of idiots. And we had parties. We were throwing us parties. We were drinking vodka. We're toasting Stalin. We didn't know a word of Russian. We're saying Viva Stalin, and they're saying Viva Roosevelt. That was it. We're all drinking. And so we're buddies for about a week. Next thing you know, we weren't carrying any weapons. The war's over. I just had a .45 I'd stick down my belt. I just couldn't go unarmed. I was so used to having weapons on me. I used to have a little .25 in my boot. I had knives all over me, hand grenade. I just couldn't, I felt funny with it. So we'd be walking through this little town, Pisek downtown at night, and you'd hear the bolt come back on a machine gun. I said, what the heck? And you'd hear, he's challenging us. There's a Russian in the doorway with a machine gun, and we yell, Amerikansky, Amerikansky, you know? And then he'd say, okay, go ahead. So we said, what the hell's going on here? They're outposting the town. Then there was a bridge going over a little river. Driving over there at night, machine gun fire. They're firing at us going. So there, politics came in. We left Pisek. The Czech people were crying. They were so sad.
Is this like a territorial thing that the Russians?
This is politics.
Basically, yeah.
We pulled back. Well, if we stayed there and started fighting, World War III.
Yeah.
Again. A lot of people said, oh, why didn't we stay there and fight the Russians? But after 300 days in combat, I really wanted to go back to Brooklyn. I didn't care about Russia. So me and a couple of million other guys didn't want to start another stupid war with the Russians. They pulled us back to a city named Strakonich. And when we left, that was the beginning of the Iron Curtain, Czechoslovakia. The Russians took it over, and we pulled back to Strakonich. They took all of this poor German army that surrendered to me. They took them prisoner, and before our people could do anything with them. And then all the displaced persons from Upper Silesia and deep in Germany, the German people, they were running from the Russians too. Men, women, children, pulling wagons, and thousands of them just coming towards us, hoping, to get to us. And we didn't know what to do with them, so we put them in makeshift areas. And the Russians started taking over the town, and they would go into this camp at night, and we'd hear the screams of the women, what was going on, and then we'd hear gunshots. Oh, they were killing them. I says, holy jeez, these were our allies. But they were revenging for what Germany did to them. As war makes a cannibal out of you. So we were back into Germany for occupation, and I was in a little town named Mainburg. Our whole battalion was spread there, but my company, it's right between Munich and Nuremberg, a little town in between the two cities. And it was like a hotel that the SS troops, which is Hitler's Elite, that was their hotel. So we took it over, and I was a sergeant, so I had my own room. And it was nothing to do, we were just waiting to go home. And they had little schools that prepare for civilian life and stuff like that. And they had a swimming pool in the town. And I got the job, they put me in charge of a prisoner war camp, a German prisoner war camp. So every day I'd have a list who was getting discharged, and I rode out to the camp. I had a little German Jeep, their vehicle. I liked it better than our Jeep. And I'd ride out there every morning, and there was a major in charge of the camp. It was about 50,000 men in there, all prisoners. And I'd give them the list, who's to go, and then give them work details, go out and cut down trees or chop, just to keep them busy. And I got very friendly with him. And of course, in Germany, we hit Germany, they gave us the German book. So I spoke pretty good German. And we didn't know, we could look it up. And I got to speak pretty good, sprechen Sie Deutsch and wie heißen Sie, wo gehen Sie, and all little stuff.
Could you understand when it was spoken back to
Yeah,
you?
yeah,
Oh.
enough. And they knew that he'd do it real slow, like say, wie heißen Sie, what's your name?
Yeah.
And he talks slow. So I got to speak pretty good. And then all the German soldiers would gather around me, and they would talk to me and everything. And you know, they told me the two reasons why they lost the war was the M1 rifle, which was our semi-automatic rifle, and the P-47 fighter plane, which used to strafe them. Like we were up against tanks. They were in the woods, Panzer tanks. We couldn't get them, our tankers. They could just radio to the P-47s, and they'd send up 8 fighter planes, and they would just drop a bomb right in the woods, knock out, and the Germans, they would strafe the highways and
So you had an opportunity here as the end of the war, but you had an opportunity to talk with some of the German soldiers.
Oh
and,
yeah, oh yeah.
And now you could just sort of...
Yeah, they were asking me questions, you know,
yeah.
and we were friends. It was all over. Nobody was, the war was over. You
Yeah.
know, we were friends, and they were asking me all the questions about the States, but they told me that 2 things. If they had the M1 rifle, which was a semi-automatic, in other words, it had a clip, 8 rounds. You put the clip in, the bolt went forward, you fire around, fire, it kicked out the gas, see?
Yeah.
The gas used to get wasted, but what they did, this Garand who invented it, the gas of the explosion came back, pushed the bolt back, and kicked the empty shell out. So you were semi-automatic. It didn't go boom, 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 boom. It went boom, boom, boom. Our infantrymen could get that clip off in a few seconds. The Germans had the bolt action. They had to fire around, pull the bolt, eject the shell, push one back in the chamber. By that time, you're dead.
Did this opportunity you had to talk with these German soldiers and now not to fight one another, but kind of to share your opinions of what was going on, did that help to sort of get rid of some of the hate that you had been carrying for those?
Oh yeah, it was over. It was
You're
over.
starting to look at it. You
It was over. It
say,
was
let's
over.
put it behind us,
Yeah.
sort of.
Yeah, it was over. And you know, I'd asked them, you know, none of them, because they had lost. They didn't think Hitler was such a great guy. But when they were winning, they had conquered all of Europe. They were ready to take England over, and they got the British Navy. You and I wouldn't be sitting here today.
Yeah.
We'd be talking German.
Yeah.
So they were with him. You know, everybody's with the winner.
Yeah.
But when it was over, he was no good. They weren't. None of them were Nazis. You know,
Yeah.
they didn't know there was concentration camps. You know, they didn't. You know, they wouldn't want to admit it.
Yeah.
And they would ask, and I'd ask them. I'd throw questions right at them. I'd say, you know, you were killing our soldiers, you know, because we were killing us too.
Yeah.
And you know, it was, you know, it's still war as hell. It's kill or be killed.
Yeah.
But I learned a lot from them, and I was amazed. Of course, it was more that beat them besides the M1 rifle and the P-47 fighter plane, which supported the units. Our bombers would Pulaski oil fields. We were bombing all the oil fields in Europe and hitting their cities. And they had no supplies, they had no gas. I tell you, at the end they were pulling artillery pieces with horses. And it was sad. And we're still mechanized. We still got tons of supplies coming across to us from the States. And that's why I say, if you don't have a manufacturing country, never start a war. Because you've got to be replaced. If one gets knocked out, you got to have one on the way. Otherwise you're going to get beat. And it was interesting. And gradually I got rid of them all. They got discharged, I gave them a sandwich. They would give them a sandwich and a bottle of water and said, go. And these poor guys that were going home to German cities that were just dead, burned right out. They didn't know where their family was alive. You really felt sorry for them. You know, they were just like us. They were drafted, and they had a fight. Whether they liked Hitler or not, they had a fight, you know. And they went home. God knows what they were going to find home, but they had to walk all the way across Germany. There was no. They just gave them a sandwich and
no transportation.
No, they were discharged. We said goodbye. It was over. Go home. And what they went home to. But they did, look at what they did in 30 years. They had a brand new country. You can't beat the German people. I mean, boy, they're tough cookies. And so basically that was it. And and then they started sending us home on a point system. And it started with 90 points. And the only ones that had 90 points really were the 1st Infantry Division, because they had fought in Africa, Sicily, and Italy. That's 3. And Europe. That's 5. They had 8 campaigns, 5 points a campaign, points for days in combat, points for medals, and they had 90. And then they kept dropping it. They got down to, I think, 65. And I really wasn't in service a long time, 2 years and 4 months or whatever. And I was going home. I got down to 65 with my medal and all the days in combat counted, days overseas counted. They had a regular system. And the 5 campaigns was 25 points. So when it hit 65, I got shipped out of Bainburg. And although we enjoyed that because we got to meet the German people in the occupation.
Oh,
that was nice. We really got to know the people. Of course, they're all in denial. They didn't know. They didn't know. They didn't like Hitler. He was bad. Everybody was bad.
Right.
And they didn't know there was concentration camps. Some people lived a mile down the road from them. And you could smell it 10 miles away. You could get the smell of death and bodies rotting 10 miles away. And these people lived down the road. They said they didn't know what the camp was, but in denial, see? So what could they say if they said to anybody, they shouldn't be killing the Jews? They'd get shot. Exactly. Yeah, because I told you, every house we go into, it had a picture of him in the living room. Like every house. The first thing I did was pull out a pistol and put a hole in the picture. I got rid of him quick. That was it. But yeah. So then I got shipped from Germany into. I'll interrupt that. From the occupation, this town of Mainburg, the war ended in April. I didn't get home till October. That was the occupation, and I got I had a choice of a week pass to Paris or Berchtesgaden to see Hitler's house and all this.
Yes, yes.
And I said, who wants to see his house? I want to go to Paris. So I went with a bunch of guys, and we had a ball in Paris. And the only thing is, we had pistol galore. When this German army came through, we just told them to throw their pistols in a truck, and there was Lugers and P-38s and all kinds. And I just filled up a little duffel bag with pistols, and I carried 2 Lugers on each hip. They were beautiful guns, the Lugers. And when I got to Paris, the guys who had been there before, they said, well, bring some cartons of cigarettes. If you run out of money, go into any French bar, and he'll give you 2,000 francs, which is, at that time was 40 bucks, for your cigarettes. And if you want to bring some pistols in, you can sell them for 5,000 francs, which would be like 100 bucks. And of course in Paris, you know, the guys I went with, we were hitting the bars, we were spending money like crazy, you know. And so I did go broke, and I had my little bag of pistols, which I really shouldn't even tell you this, but I didn't know anything. And this black colored guy was sitting in a truck in Paris, and I said to him, I said, hey, any of you guys like to get a souvenir? He said, hey man, what you got? I said, I got some German pistols. I sold them to this guy, and I often thought, where did those guns end up? Yeah. I never gave it a thought they were going back to the States, and God knows what maybe they were just taking a souvenir. He said, I'll sell them to my buddies. So maybe they were, right, they were just normal GIs. So maybe like I took a Luger home and a little ladies 25 and stuff like that. What I want with a lot of guns and stuff. But to top it off, on my way back from Paris, I guess I was drinking everything in Pigalle and Montmartre and all these little bars, all the GIs used to go in. I probably was drinking gasoline, and they were calling it cognac. I got yellow jaundice.
Oh.
And I got back into Germany, and geez, the guy, my buddy says, geez, you got a yellow color. So I went to the medics, and the dopey medic says to me, he says, what's the matter with you, Sarge? So the captain there was a doctor. He says, you're some medic. He said, this man is as yellow as a crayon. You're asking him what's wrong? So they sent me to I was completely yellow. That was when you get yellow jaundice, your liver backs up.
It affects your liver, exactly.
And the poison from the alcohol probably backed up. I was drinking rot gut, you know, I didn't know it, just having a good time, backed my whole system up. My eyes went yellow, the blue and the white were yellow, and I was just like the color of a deep yellow crayon, my whole body. I got scared. Anyhow, they put me in a hospital in Regensburg, Germany, and the Danube River flowed right under my window. And it wasn't blue, it was muddy. It was a muddy river. I was looking for the blue. But I was sick for about 2 weeks, and this army nurse, she'd just say, every morning come in, she was a tough guy, hold the mirror up, says, what do you think, soldier? How do you look? I says, oh, I'm a little less yellow. That was the only, there was no cure. It just had to work its way.
Matter of time.
And they had me on a bland diet. And I was in a ward with guys who had yellow jaundice. It was like an epidemic. You can get it from greasy mess kits, you know, and the way they wash mess kits now. I mean, you shoved it in a barrel full of hot water and shoved it in a rinse, and that was it. There was soap and a lot of grease left. So a lot of guys got sick from dirty mess kits. I got mine from drinking, really. Anyhow, so and one guy in my ward, they flew. He was so bad, they flew him back to England. He died. So we heard that. I got kind of scared, but I got over it and I came back home.
Have you had any problems since?
No.
No residuals?
What it did, when I
as
first
liver?
come home, the doctor told me my liver was enlarged due to the damage done. But I never had any problem with it, you know.
That's good.
I goofed too. I should have put in for a, when I got discharged, when you get discharged, after everything's finished, there's a guy sitting there who says, any soldiers want to make claims against the government? And some guys were putting claims, they got acne, they got their shoulder hurt them, because the government was handing out checks then for disability like they were donuts and coffee. And don't be me, I wanted to get home so fast, I never mentioned the yellow jaundice. I could have got a pension for life for that, you know, well, for a while until it cleared up. But I just wanted out. So I made a lot of mistakes, but I was happy I was alive. And then I think we went. Then we took the ship home. We went to Camp Lucky Strike in France, and that's the big camp. A million guys were waiting for ships to take them home. And while you waited there was nothing but crap games and card games and anything to keep busy. And finally, I got on a ship. I think it was a Liberty ship, and guys were loaded with money. A lot of men were on the ship who had been prisoner of wars for like 3 years, and they were getting all this lump packed at once. And a couple of $1,000 in those days was like 100,000 today. And I had a lot of back pay. When you're in combat, you don't get paid. I had the money, so I had pretty money, and I loved to shoot crap. Being from Brooklyn, that was our #1 pastime, was craps. So
is this on the boat back
home? Yeah,
home?
it's a ship. Yeah,
Yeah,
ship.
going
I
back
forget
home.
it. I think it was a Liberty ship, and there was nothing but card games. They were playing, guys were like poker, $50 a card. Crap games, guys were shooting 100. So I got in a crap game, and I had probably the role of my life, and I had hit about 7 or 8 passes. You don't know what craps are.
No, I don't.
I hit about 7 or 8 passes. But luckily, I got a little chicken, and it probably I could have been a millionaire, but I got chicken. I pulled off some money. And then I shot what was left, and I crapped out. But I won about $2,000, and that was my money for going home. So I said that was the end of that. I made enough. But some guys had a lot of money, and they went home broke. They could have, a lot of guys saying, I'm going home, I'm going to open a gas station, I'm going to open a small farm, I'm going back to the farm and buy a tractor. You know, guys from all over the country, I'm going to this. And they got cleaned out on the ship. There was, you know.
What did you do when you got home?
Well, I got home, and it was no big deal. I got home, and that picture you saw, I got discharged at Fort Dix. And I think I told you, after you see the chaplain, after he discharged, he's in a big hall, and all the guys said, he said, now when you guys get home, he says, you've been living like animals now for 2 and 3 years. He said, war's over. He said, you're going back to civilized people. So he said, when you want the butter, just say, please pass the butter. Don't say, pass the effing butter. And that was a big joke. I always remember that she was a chaplain.
Yeah.
But he was right. We were so, you know, every word out of your mouth is a foul word when you're in the field. You know, there's no clean language, you know. F is a big word in combat, you know. And so that was good. And then anyhow, I came home, no big deal. Me and the buddy in the picture, we decided we'd stay in New York City, and we hit the bars. We had a good time. And we said goodbye. I never saw him again. Oh, Sheldon is his name, Bob Sheldon.
Okay. And
then I took a cab from New York City to home. And they had my family had a sign out there. They lived on the 3rd floor.
Now, is this in Brooklyn?
Yeah, Brooklyn.
Brooklyn.
The cab driver, he dropped me off, and big sign, welcome home.
Yeah.
And that was it. That was it. And then my mother went crazy seeing me, you know. She hadn't seen me in almost 3 years. And they had a couple of parties and all the relatives were asked. Everyone wanted to know about the war. Yeah. And I didn't tell them.
You wanted to put it behind you?
I didn't, anything I'm telling you, I wasn't telling them, you know. It didn't concern them, you know. They were home. My father was an air raid warden. And, you know, they did have air raids. You know, at night you had curtains in case, they never got bombed, but just in case. He was an air raid warden, and he gave blood, oh God, he gave, I don't know how many gallons of blood he gave. So he did his share.
Sure.
So that was it, the relatives, and I had a brother and sister, and I looked up some of my old girlfriends, and I didn't want to go to work, and I could have gone to any college in the world at free. But after all I went through, seeing burning cities and some people walk along the road, displaced persons, and concentrated, school seemed so small, it didn't mean anything to me. That was another goof in my life. I could have gone to any college I wanted free. And so I bummed around. A couple of my buddies were coming home, and they had the 5220 club. The government would give you $20 a week for 52 weeks, all veterans. And you had to sign up, and they'd give you $20. So we bummed around, and we had a good time, and you know, we chasing the girls around and hitting the bars, and you know, doing things we should have been doing from 18 to 21.
Kind of making up for time lost.
Yeah, 3 years of good times. And, right. And I did that for a while, and then finally my mother started rubbing hints. She says, "You think you want to go to work someday?" I said, "Maybe." So I went to work for a food company in Brooklyn, and I'd say I was about 21 then, I guess. And then at 25, I married. My wife was working there. I got married. I was 25. She was only 19. And then I did go back to college. I went to community college for a couple of years, and then they transferred from Brooklyn in the 60s. They moved upstate. They asked me to move with them, and I didn't really know whether I wanted to or not. They said,
"This is still with the food company?"
Yeah. They said, "We're going to Horseheads." I said, "Where the hell is Horseheads? Is that a funny name?" And the guys they were calling it Horse's Ass. And one guy called me up. I was a director of purchasing. And a guy called me up one of this company. He says, "What is this, Whorehead? Is it Whorehead?" I said, "No, it's Horseheads." And there was all kinds of jokes about poor Horsehead. And they gave us a week to look it over. So I brought my wife. We had 2 little kids then. We drove around. And she had a very good job with Chase Manhattan, right in downtown Manhattan. A very good job. And we had to kick that around a lot. Did we want to move upstate? Or did, you know, she had a good job, and I could have got another job because I was a purchasing director. I had good experience. And so we finally said, well, it'd be a new life for us, you know. Yeah. The city wasn't going any place. Not at all. You know, it was getting, the neighborhoods were starting to get a little bad. Yeah. And so we moved, and I had a house in Sexton, Brooklyn, which is a nice section. They call it Dyker Heights. It's Bay Ridge. And it's really it's still beautiful. I sold my house when I moved up here for $23,000. I couldn't give the thing away. And a year or 2 later, my son calls me and says, "Hey, Dad, your house just sold for $100,000. He kept calling me. The last sale was $400,000. I said, "Steve, don't call me anymore. I'm getting sick." But you see, people were buying neighborhoods. Right. The house, it was only a brick house. It was attached on one side. It wasn't nothing fancy. And but people buying neighborhoods in the cities now. Yeah. The house isn't that important. Is the neighborhood safe to bring up kids in this neighborhood? Because we lucked out. The mafia lived in that area, Dyker Heights, and they ran. If you were an undesirable walking the streets at night, the mafia guys would want to know what you're doing here, and you better have a good answer. So we lucked out. Irish, German, all the nationalities. They actually were protecting us. I'm not sticking up for them. Mm-hmm. And the neighborhood is gorgeous today. Every time I go down and visit my daughter, we drive through. It's beautiful, but it's protected by the mafia. And I had nothing to do with them, but we lucked out. We moved into the right neighborhood. People don't know these things, you know. That it's funny. Okay.
Well, I thought maybe in closing here, if you'd be willing just to share some of your thoughts about just in general, about war or the military experience.
Well,
if you want to share that.
You know, it's something I wouldn't have wanted missed. I wanted to be part of it. I felt I'm gung ho for the country. In fact, I tell my wife, I said, if they need me today, they can have me. I'm an old Recon man. She said, you got to be kidding. She says, you wouldn't go past your basic training anymore. I said, you're in a wheelchair. So I'm gung ho for the country, and you know, and I believe in it, and I'm proud to have served. As much as I went through, I would gladly do it again. I would die for the country. I was willing to die. That's how I feel about it. And I feel what I did, although it wasn't the nicest work in the world, I did the job they wanted me to do. They had an enemy that was trying to take over the world and was putting people in camps and just, you know, and conquered France and was ready for England. And I wanted to be a part of saving that. I just wanted to do my share, me and millions of other kids. And it was an experience that a lot of, unfortunately, you know, we lost 300,000 men in World War II. 300, that's 30 million kids. They're kids, they are kids, they're not old men. And when you think about that, you know, they deserve the credit, and they're not here to take the bows, you know. And so I feel that oh.
Well, actually, I think we pretty much wrapped it up.
Time's up.
I mean, did you have anything more that you
No, I
wanted?
think I'm getting hoarse.
Okay, yeah.
My
We've
voice-
gone way
once
beyond
I-
our 90 minutes.
Once
but-
I get
Yeah.
started,
Yeah.
things keep coming back. You
Yeah,
know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know, I'm talking 50 years ago,
exactly.
more than that.
60.
60.
60?
Yeah, 60. No,
Close to
well,
60.
say I went in service at 18,
40. Well, we're
and
yeah. In the 40s. Here we are in 2003.
Yeah.
So
that's-
it's 60. I did the math on that before I came in.
Oh, you did your homework.
I did
right?
that. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, as I say, a lot of things I forgot. You
Right.
know, I forgot names of places.
Yeah.
And,
I don't know if
I do keep contact with
Yeah.
3 men. Through our division association, that we get a monthly bulletin, and each is a chapter of each part of the country. And seeing our names, 3 of my men who I knew from my company, we correspond.
Wonderful.
And I met one guy who was in my platoon in Phoenix. He lives in Phoenix. And we drove down. We took a plane out to see the Grand Canyon. And I met him.
Oh, wonderful.
So we correspond. So, but I think most of the men in my platoon are probably dead now,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And here I am.
Yeah. Al, I just want to tell you, it's been an honor for me to hear your story.
Really?
Yes. I mean, this is, you know, this is live history.
Oh yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
It really has been an honor. I'm glad that you were willing to share it. And that,
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm
I
glad I
just really-
try to help.
yeah.
But you know, I really went into the ins and outs, which
Oh,
people
yeah.
don't know about, basic training and different things like that.
Exactly.
And the dealings with the English soldiers. and-
Sure.
yeah, people don't know that. But
Yeah.
through it all, it was okay.
Yeah.
You know, we did some things. Had we lost, we would be on trial for war crimes.
Exactly.
You know, but luckily we won.
Right.
You know, it's
Yeah.
kill or be killed, and war is hell, and that's what General Patton said.
Yeah.
It's not a Hollywood movie
No.
at all. That's the trouble. Hollywood puts out these ragtag movies of John Wayne, and when you die, you have a cigarette in your mouth and give this letter to my girlfriend.
Mhm.
Not so. It's shrapnel and pieces in their heads. It's not Hollywood. And people who haven't been in combat have no conception of what it's like. See, Hollywood, even that movie of D-Day and all that, that looked good and everything, but say a sergeant something,
Sergeant Ryan.
yeah.
That
That would never happen. They would never send men looking for all across the country looking for somebody. I mean, it's a Hollywood.
Right.
Yeah, it's not real war.
Yeah.
But it's over, and I'm here. That's
Yeah.
I'm thankful for
Thank
that.
God for that.
I did pray a lot.
I
I prayed a lot.
bet.
I'm a Catholic. I always had rosary beads with me.
Did you?
And I
Yeah.
prayed a lot to the Blessed Mother. And I think she was watching me.
I
Yeah,
think so.
yeah. That's
I
it.
think so.
Okay.
Thanks very much. But
Okay.
before you go,
Are
I
you
brought
going to
some-
stay here? You staying?
I'm going to find if Heather is still here. But I told you I wanted to bring in this tin that my mother had.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure. I think it commemorates Pearl Harbor. I'm not sure, but I think if I show it to you, you might recognize. Let me just get some.
Oh, did she want to photograph? Did we photograph Diana's stuff?
Yeah, we did.
We did this.
We did that.
We did the Silver
We did
Star.
the medal. You read the medal.
Yeah. Read the medal. What else do I got in here? Oh, that's just my
Yeah, I don't
my
know.
company
I don't
name.
know.
No, you
Okay,
couldn't
well,
see any.
Yeah.
I didn't even know if I was in there.
Yeah.
Actually, I went down to the veteran, but that old citation's wearing out, and they wrote